how does that affect church? Well, I think the idea of an AI preacher is not something that's going to happen. However, it's interesting that people are almost looking for AI church. It's like maybe the next stage of church is I just consume the elements of it that I want and I just leave the rest. It's interesting when it gets to the point where someone feels like they're not actually included because they're not in a clique. So they're not in one of those groups in the church. That happens spontaneously. Now, funnily enough, C.S. Lewis talked about that back in the 40s. So this is obviously not just a modern problem. And he said that cliques in churches are like onions, that even if you get in a clique, then you're constantly worried about being in the centre of that clique. Because I've always thought, I can have a few good friends, but I can liberate them for the gospel so that we can be all reaching out to more people.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Shock Absorber podcast, and it is awesome to have you along with us, and it's awesome to have the gang back together here on the couch. John Deere hat extraordinaire.
Yes.
Stu, welcome. As I said before, I always like your hat. And Tim, how are you?
Hey, I'm well, thank you.
No hat. No hat for us?
No.
It's good. It's very sunny in here, so sometimes I need to just wear a hat because I just don't want to do my hair.
Yeah, I understand that sentiment.
Yeah. But you've got beautiful salt and pepper hair.
Well, I actually meant to go for a haircut this morning, but got caught up doing emails before the podcast, so it's kind of this. I realised what the time was.
Wow, you're so busy.
Oh, it's just,
meant to get a haircut, but just doing emails.
It's all right.
I do like that. Your hair color is awesome, though.
Thank you.
It's that. I hope my hair goes like that, but I don't have as dark a hair as you.
That's true. Yeah.
To make it really stand out, unfortunately, for me, not you. Tim, you have an interesting story about a Catholic priest and AI. Is that correct?
Yes, this is a story that came across my feed this week that an AI Catholic priest has been defrocked after he recommended a Gatorade baptism.
Oh, like baptizing a child with Gatorade.
That is my understanding.
An AI Catholic priest has been defrocked because he recommended Gatorade in a baptism.
Yes. Yep. So basically what happened was the Catholic Church...
You can't make this stuff up.
The Catholic Church started an AI model of a Catholic priest. So people could ask this Catholic priest questions and he would then answer.
About the faith.
Assumedly in line with the Catholic faith and commonly asked questions. But one of the quotes here on this article, recently my colleagues and I at Catholic Answers have received a good deal of helpful feedback concerning our new technology. The feedback has complaints that the software shouldn't have masqueraded as a man of God and giving out unholy advice. And so there's a whole lot of things in this article about things that it had tested. But one questioner asked whether it was okay to baptise in Gatorade, and the AI priest said yes, so that was fine. So people were, basically trying to test it and stretch it and see how far. And I think it was also this one that, it must have been another article, but insisted that he was actually a real priest. So when people ask it, are you real? And he said yes, and he would put him, locate himself.
Yeah, I said that.
Yeah, it would locate itself in a particular village in Italy.
You're kidding.
So there was...
Why Italy?
I've got no idea. Maybe that's just the story that it got told about itself. I'm not sure.
Or it figured out that story for itself.
Maybe.
Wow.
What was his name?
It's Father Justin.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should make T-shirts. Ask Father Justin.
Wow.
Father Justin, yeah.
With a Gatorade bottle.
Do you look forward to the day of being replaced by an AI bot, Stu?
Well, that brings up the whole conversation, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, is it time to replace pastors with robots and AI? Maybe.
One Twitter thread, one
Maybe
question.
not.
I was going to say,
Do you want to clear that up? You'd be out of a job.
Apparently, Father Justin blessed someone on Twitter saying it was okay for them to marry their brother. Occasion, it was a joyous occasion, and also offered absolution after a confession. So, yeah, these are these things that were
pretty
being
scary,
built into the model.
So does that get built? Help me with this AI thing. Like, does it only pronounce stuff that it's been taught to say, or does it also learn and make up stuff that it thinks? Is it thinking for itself yet, AI?
Oh, well, I wouldn't think so. No, I mean,
yet?
I'm not sure exactly the technology that this is based on. The little bit I understand about things like ChatGPT is that it's this sort of predictive text
Machine learning, it's called, isn't it?
Yeah, but I'm not even sure that it's necessarily learning. It's basically spitting out what it thinks is the next best word after a sentence.
Okay.
And so it will write cohesive and coherent answers, but it is not even cognizant of what it's putting back. It's just spitting out things. Having read so much, it kind of knows basic speech patterns and it can understand how to communicate information.
In a sense, summarises the vast amount of content on the internet. I feel like that's what ChatGPT, for example, does.
Yes, yeah.
Or make it up if it doesn't find it. That's what I found.
Well, we have a policy document at YouthWorks College where we warn students that AI is confidently wrong.
Good. That's a good phrase.
Yeah, because
AI is confidently wrong.
Because it won't. It doesn't know that it's wrong. It just spits things out at you and will just tell you whatever you want.
Just like the AI bot did.
Yeah, like the AI bot saying it's totally okay to baptise your baby in Gatorade. So it will tell you what you want to hear largely, and which is interesting as well from when we thought about a couple of weeks ago talking about discipleship, and sometimes we want to hear things about ourselves, but actually it's good to hear back things that other people may know. So that idea that if it's just going to affirm all of my beliefs and tell me I'm right all the time, then that's really worrying. Whether it's trying to get some facts about history for an assessment so you can do some basic research, or whether it's talking about spiritual matters like Father Justin here, if it's just affirming your beliefs or it's just telling you what you want to hear, it's really bad for knowledge acquisition. It's really bad for learning. It's really bad for holistic formation. So there's lots of things to be concerned about, I think.
And there's something about that with the kind of, we've talked about in previous episodes recently, the inward turn and the individualism of things, and also like the algorithmic sense of content where you just get whatever you want and whatever you're interested in. But I find even with that, you sometimes just go down a rabbit hole. You're like, I just keep getting the same thing over and over again, and you get stuck in this kind of addictive loop of just looking at stuff. And obviously, it's designed to do that. Do you find? You showed us the video of the latest robot that Boston Dynamics have made. Do you find it a little bit? I watched that video. I'm like, I just don't even know what to think about that. I find it a bit concerning. Is that the way you see that as well?
Yeah, I mean, everything's got good and bad application, and because I think the sinfulness of the human soul, and because people are looking for power, they're going to use anything they can to further that. I think I suppose the default that I think of with AI and robots is just people talk about, and I'm not. Maybe we could even look at this another week, but there's this predictive journey that AI is going to go on where it starts to think for itself, and then it becomes smarter than us and quicker than us, and then can actually be creative itself and think like a human brain, and that sort of scares me a bit. But that's why I was asking that question, like, do they think for themselves yet, or are they just spitting out text or whatever? But if you look at how computers went from the 80s to where they are now, it's kind of terrifying how quickly that happened. And telephones, like, who would have thought you'd be carrying a phone in your pocket or on your wrist, or that sort of stuff's crazy. So apparently President Biden last year had a conference on AI or something, or he said something about it, and he was predicting that the governments need to put some kind of rules around this. But I'm thinking, how do you put rules around that sort of stuff? But anyway, he predicted in that conference last year that the next 10 years, there's going to be more change in the next 10 years than in the whole last 50 years technologically. So, it's not just Boston Dynamics that have brought out a new humanoid robot that's now fully electric. Tesla's brought out a new one, Optimus Prime. The Chinese have been developing robots. There have been 10 new humanoid robots developed this year. And there's also all these different companies that are doing AI. Google's doing AI. There's ChatGPT. There's, all this competition amongst AI generators as well. And it's changing the world even more dramatically. So I've been thinking a bit recently, like if you look back to 2008 when the iPhone came out, I think the internet was a big thing, but it was almost like culture changed more with the iPhone. And
personalised the internet.
I saw a lady the other day in the rain with an umbrella and a baby on, strapped onto her in a carrier. Thank you. And she was on a phone walking down the footpath with an umbrella between, her arm and her. She was sort of holding that.
Yeah. And
then she had this baby, and I was like, wow, she's actually looking at the phone as she walks down the road. And at one level, I'm just like, oh, well, she's on the phone, whatever. I mean, I've got a phone on my lap now. Here, look, we've got computers and stuff. But I was like, wow, we're getting addicted to this stuff so much. And Apple have tried to bring out this new glasses or whatever. I don't think it's really been picked up by people. It's very expensive, and I think we all get a bit creeped out having some computers attached to our eyes. I think it's something about the human face that people don't want that so intrusively, I think. But the robot stuff, I mean, the Boston Dynamics robot can do things that we can't. They got the Tesla bot, and I saw a video, you might want to look it up on YouTube, of this Tesla bot taking, I think it was eggs, and putting them into another egg thing.
Right.
Like it's that delicate.
Yeah.
And there was another robot demonstration I saw where they had the robot wash the dishes and wipe the dishes, and it was doing it all and talking to you at the same time. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. And the predictions are that these robots are going to come down in price to something like $30,000 each, and people are going to be buying a robot to do their yard. So presumably we're walking down the road with a baby and an umbrella looking at our phone while the robots are mowing the lawn. I don't know, it could be quite gnarly.
Yeah, sorry, I've got a number of different thoughts buzzing in my head. One of them is, it's interesting, like with big technological changes, we often think that therefore we're going to have more free time.
Yeah.
We assume that is going to be the payoff. And
like the labour-saving devices in the 60s and 70s.
That's right. Yeah. You wear washing machines so you don't have to manually scrub out all of your suds in the whatever that board was called.
Washboard.
Well, the washboard, that's right. Yeah. And
I'm good for the old things, aren't I?
Thanks, mate. Yeah.
I've got a bit of context.
Yeah, back when the world was black and white.
Yeah, back in the day.
Yeah.
The washboard.
And electric lawn mowers and vacuum cleaners and all these things. And we thought, but you talk to the average householder today and go, so you've got all this leisure time, right? And like, no, of course not.
Nope.
We still manage to fill up that time. So,
that's right.
I mean,
That's
if we
really
have
good
robots doing our dishes, our laundry, our lawn mowing, so that I never have to do those things ever again, is it the same kind of shift? Well, I'd never have to washboard out my clothes anymore because the washing machine does that for me. And therefore I'm, all I spend my day playing chess and reading books and, walking the park. Like, of course not. No, we still manage to fill all of our time. So I think that we hope for this kind of, utopia where we get to just rest, and we never quite achieve that. The other thought that I was thinking, you mentioned the Apple Vision Pro kind of goggles. And I can't remember, Joel, whether we talked about this on a podcast or whether we just talked off air at one point, but I don't see many people taking up the Vision Pro. But again, talk about it 10 years' time, that technology will be in frames like we're wearing now. And so as our children enter adulthood and they go for their prescription studies or even their non-prescription studies, it's just a default question is going, and what operating system are we putting into those for you? And I just think that's where this, I mean, the Apple Vision Pro looks ridiculous and I can't see many people actually wandering around who
Unless you wear it with a snorkel.
That's right, yeah.
It looks like it needs a snorkel.
Yeah. But when the technology shrinks to the point that it's just in these glasses, I don't know that you've got them on, but you're looking at your emails or surfing social media or doing all these kinds of things while we're having a conversation. I think that's
exciting too, though, because
there's opportunities, but I just wonder, what does that do for us? What does it do for our formation? What does it do for us as humans?
Yeah, good point. Relationally, hey.
Relationally, absolutely, yeah.
Well, I was thinking you were talking about the robots and lots of other people making robots. It's like the space race almost back in the 60s. Yeah. And I was thinking, well, why do we as humans want to do that? Why do we want to progress it so much to the fact we obviously adapt to it. We've adapted to now having the internet is part of life or in our context. And then even watching the Vision Pro goggles, they're like, you can have this screen open and this screen open and all you do is just drag it over with your finger. And I'm like, but does that mean you just sit? That's what I was scared about. Is you just sit in fake, or not fake, but a virtual world for the entirety of your day. That's my concern about it. And then do you miss out on the relational aspects that I'm saying?
And then it's going to be really interesting, because the first world, people will be living on the lounge, and then in the developing world, people won't have the money for all that sort of stuff. So that'll be interesting too. So there'll be these two different kinds of existence human beings have, increasingly technologically immersed, and people who aren't, I think. Because, someone in Australia who is, just used to keeping on buying all this stuff. I mean, like you said, it's not saving us time. I remember back in the day, people used to say, I'm too busy to read my Bible and pray. But then with the advent of social media, people aren't too busy to be on social media. So there was a time where no one had any time, but they've made time for social media. So there's a really interesting thing about the human heart and what we desire, and also all the neurological theories around what these devices are doing to our brains as well, and how we think and how we relate. Yes, the world's changing really quickly,
and it makes us really passive. Like, we're not actively engaged in our world. And we look at your screen time report on your devices and see how much time you've actually spent on those that have been sort of frivolous time, and you just realise I'm very bad at using my time actively, like proactively saying I'm going to choose to do these things at these times, and that's going to be part of it, is that actually being formed as a human, and then when we think about being formed spiritually, it takes proactive effort to engage well with God and His world when there's all these other distractions around. That it's a lot easier to bum Twitter than it is to take out your Bible and read. Actually, there was a great Babylon Bee article on this, headline on this the other day. I'll see if I can find it, but keep on going.
No, I just think it's at what point is too far? That's what I'm concerned about it. But maybe people thought that in the 50s about different
There's not going to be an end to it.
No.
It's just going to keep going.
It is, isn't it?
There's no too far. It's like what we've said in the shock absorber for ages. These bumps in the road are just getting bigger and more frequent. So we need to be more agile. And that's why we've been talking about frameworks that help us to do that. And that's why I liked the stuff we talked about around being creative and contributing to culture, rather than just either rejecting it or accepting it.
Or consuming it.
Or copying it or whatever. I think it's very important that the generations create spaces in the local church that are meaningful. I just went up to Collie Enabri 2 weeks ago, and I went up for the River Convention with our Aboriginal brothers and sisters who run a 2-week River Convention. I jumped onto the end of that. The River Convention goes around different country towns where people gather and have open airs, they call them, which is like outreach moments, and also encouragement, Bible study for Christians in small towns around the northwest of New South Wales. So I drove out to Collie Enabri, and the last time I'd been to Collie, which is about 12 and a half hours northwest of Sydney, for those of you who might know that area. Collie is a very small little town, and I was last there at the long weekend last year when they had a convention last year, and I was given the privilege of doing the talks for that weekend. And one of the young ladies in the town became a Christian at the last convention, and she was there again when I came up this year. And not only had she stayed a Christian, but she's joined the local Anglican church in Collie, and George and Carmel, our BCA partners, Bush Church Aid partners in Walgett and Collie, two adjoining towns. Anyway, so George and Carmel run an Anglican service on Sunday afternoons, and there's about 5 or 6 people who go to that service. And the young lady who became a Christian last year joined that church and joined that service. And it was lovely to see her again. And my wife Louise and I were chatting with her, and my wife Lou said to her, "How are you going being the only teenager in the church in Collie?" Because she's just there herself. And she said, "Actually, it's the only place I have to come and have real conversations each week, so I really look forward to it." And I was talking to Carmel, and she was saying how she's doing a Bible study with this young lady, which is terrific. And anyway, this young lady got baptised on the weekend, and she asked the community asked me if I would baptise her, which was a real privilege. So we baptised her in the Barwon River along with some other people who got baptised on the day, which was terrific. But the really beautiful thing was that she's been doing Bible study for pretty much just almost a year, and she said she's feeling like she's getting enough knowledge to ask Carmel to teach her how to run a Bible study for her 10-year-old sister, so she can go home and run a Bible study for a 10-year-old sister. And it just really reframed youth and kids ministry for me, because so much of Sydney youth and kids ministry is driven by, it's really a positive thing for young people to have other young people their age at church. And it's almost like they're going to miss out on their discipleship if they don't have other young people their age at church. And I think of her and think she has no other churches to go to. There is only one church to go to in the town, and she has limited opportunities, but she's loving it, and she's being a part of her church and being a sister in that church. And it got me thinking, a lot of our assumptions, particularly as parents, are I want to go to a church where my kids are going to have discipleship with other kids their age, and yet this young lady is thriving and growing as a Christian with no other teenagers. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's ideal, but it's very exciting to see that she's growing as a Christian, and she's got a really special relationship with the people in that church, and now she wants to be a Bible study leader. Now, I said to her, it'd be really cool if you wanted to come down to Sydney and meet some of our young people or vice versa, and she's excited about that prospect. But, it got me thinking about what is some of our modern preconceived ideas about discipleship, and are they actually realistic? I mean, Tim, you said that after COVID, a lot of young people have migrated from the smaller churches to the bigger churches. Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, I don't think it was a COVID thing, though. I think
you don't? But is it
it seems to be a longer
impulse?
term. Yes, I think it is. And I see this even now. There are small churches in my region that I look after for Youth Works, and there are parents and sometimes even the minister's family who they will send their kids or their teenagers particularly to youth groups in other churches because they want them to have teenage Christian relationships. And so the thought of having them only at their own church is exactly what you said, is that we presume that the best discipleship for them is lots of other young people, and so people will gravitate to the medium and large churches, which means that the small churches never seem to grow. And we have this as well. We've had this with some of our smaller gatherings at Soul Revival, that we've had families come through, Yarrawarra or Cronulla, which are smaller gatherings, not as many kids or teenagers, and go, I like this Soul Revival thing, but I'm going to come to Saturday night or Sunday morning at Kirrawee in the factory, where there are many more families and people my age and my stage.
And there is benefit to that, isn't
Absolutely,
there? Like, you want your kids to have Christian friends, but then, I even within Kirrawee, I mean, you have year groups that go through that aren't actually very big. So my son Elijah didn't really have anyone in his year group all the way through growing up at our church, yet there's 150 young people at our church. So you get those sort of dynamics too. So, but anyway, coming back to this AI stuff and the technology, we've become so individualistic, I think, like we've been saying about what are my needs as a Christian, that it's good to say I need to have a place where I can grow as a Christian. And we're very blessed in Sydney to not be in the situation of Collie Innerabri, where there are lots of churches people can choose to go to, and they're all good things. But a shadow of that is that if we become so orientated towards consumption of what the church offers and we become consumers, then we might miss out on some of that costly discipleship that we also talk about on the podcast as well, that we do grow through it costing us. And I'm seeing a young lady that is actually putting in some really hard yards but yet they're not really hard yards. We stayed for supper after church, and it was lovely. We had one lady who was making cheese and tomato sayos, which is actually my favourite snack of all time. And I'm like, wow, I haven't had these for ages. And we're having a cup of tea and we're talking, we're all laughing and sharing stories, and she was loving it. She was part of a family, and that was really lovely. So, I thought that's interesting. So with technology, we seem to be like more honing in on what we need, because we've got all these other things that give us all the, I suppose that we consume all this AI now and all this technology, and we're getting more and more used to focusing on, what do I need to get through the day, which is, like I said, not a bad thing. But then the shadow of that is, am I really coming to church for others and seeking to give and embracing otherness instead of sameness? I don't know. Maybe that's something that all this technology is focusing us more on ourselves, I think. I don't know what you two think of that.
Well, it feels like we even talked about being a consumptive, moving towards an addictive culture. Yeah. And then that's again why I was with the Apple Vision Pro, I was like, this is just going to exacerbate that. And I'm wondering, there's always, we talked about it before a lot on the podcast, there's always a reaction to something, and often the pendulum swings way too far the other way, doesn't it? So what my other question, I suppose, is with the AI and things like that, and in terms of our relation, the way that we relate to each other, there are studies that show that children especially, they've been exposed to screens for a long time, that their relational reality is a lot different to what ours is, what ours we grew up in. So if the AI goes too far, if we get too addicted and just sitting in a chair with our glasses and we're just doing everything, what do you think the reaction might be culturally to that? Do you want to go first, Tim? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that at the same time we've also got reactions against this. So we have there are voices who are speaking up and saying this is not okay, and are responding against this high consumption. Sometimes, interestingly, coming from younger millennials and Gen Z, from within the generation that grew up as screen natives, sometimes called, and digital natives. They have never known a world without these handheld devices providing everything to them, and they feel overwhelmed. They feel like they've got really high mental ill health. They feel distracted, that they can't cope with things that are going on in life. They're seeing their anxiety rising. They go, actually, this is not okay. And so there are small but significant movements of Gen Zs or younger Gen Ys who are trading in their smartphones for flip phones, for example, going back to old Nokias and those kinds of things, because whether just temporarily or for part-time use or whatever, because they realise that they actually need external controls in order to help them be human, and they feel there is a dehumanising aspect to some of these things. That it's interesting that there are some people speaking out against this already from within. It's not just the old people saying, "Oh, back in my day we didn't have these things," which is something I find myself telling my kids all the time. Every time they have to go without their screen, I go, "Yeah, it's just like in the 1990s, right?" And they go, "Oh, shut up about the 1990s." But it's but it's not just the old people, shaking their rakes and saying, "Oh, back in my day." It's actually the generations themselves who are saying, "I feel less than human," or "There's something wrong, and even if I can't articulate it, we don't like this." And in other spaces, you've got the different slow movements. So the slow food movement was one of the first in this idea that fast food was making food cheap, affordable, but worse. So for all of its cheapness, for all of its affordability, for all of its accessibility, it was actually a worse product. And so the slow food movement, I believe starting in Italy, was this, let's get back to doing slow, like getting back to seasonal. Like I'm not going to cook as if I can always access tomatoes. I'm only going to cook with tomatoes when they're in season, and they're locally produced or whatever it is, and maybe even my own garden. And I'm going to take the time to chop them and cook slowly and all of these kinds of things. And that kind of, I believe that it started with the slow food movement and has kind of moved on to other things. So there's slow fashion movements. There's, I'm
just in the slow movement.
Slow movement, yeah.
That's my latest. I think that's my contribution.
Excellent. No, that's good.
Slow productivity.
Well, slow productivity, so I finished that last week by Cal Newport. I think that's really, is in this world of not being busy but being slow. Like he's just picking up on those things. I remember I got a book on my shelf, I think I read a few years ago, called The Slow Church or Slow Church something. I need to go back and reread it. I can't remember anything about it. But I think they've picked up on some of these ideas as well. So that's my initial reaction, is trying to work out what's the counter formation that might be necessary with this increase in AI. And one other thought, was the more we rely on technology, the less dependent we are on others. And we often assume that that's a good thing. And that's another wondering that I've heard a number of both Christian leaders and also just secular thought leaders wonder is, are we actually designed as humans to be necessarily dependent on others? And if that's the case, if we are necessarily dependent on others, then the fact that I can rely on technology and AI and now robots to do a lot of the things that I would otherwise require me to have incarnate relationships with other people, maybe that again is not actually doing me service in terms of what it means to be fully human. So yeah, there's some of my wonderings as well.
Any thoughts on that, Stu? One thing I'm finding is, why do we always want to seek going back to that relational aspect? Maybe you wouldn't give us the thoughts on what the reaction would be, but why do we always want to seek going back to something that was done before?
Well, we are relational beings. I mean, we've been created by a relational God, who's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, who's in relationship, and we've been made for relationship with God, and we've rejected that relationship, and then God has brought us back to that relationship. So it's obviously fundamental to the human condition, because Jesus, in his sacrifice on the cross and rising new life, paying for our sin on the cross, is, and I know there's a lot to unpack there, but we have the barrier between us and God taken away when Jesus takes away the barrier of sin. And I think we've talked a number of times on this podcast about the fact that not all progress is progress. So I might renovate an old house and put in a new kitchen, and I might put in a TV and into this 100-year-old house, and but when I stand back and look at the renovated house, is it actually better than the original? It might not be. It might have some new elements to it that are functional and helpful, but it might not be as beautiful. It might not work as well as a house anymore. So not all technological advances are progress, but we sort of tend to be addicted to progress. We're always wondering, is the next iPhone going to be better than the last one? I remember the time when each iPhone that came out, there was a big line around the block because people were so excited about the next little glass cube that came out of...
You used to watch the keynote?
We used to watch the keynote. Yeah, I was massive into all that sort of stuff. No one ever even knows if their release is up now.
Hardly, because they release one every year now.
Yeah, they do, but they don't seem to do anything new. They're all the same. So
but it didn't used to be every year.
They've matured to a point that... Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was just saying it didn't used to be every year either. So it used to be every 2 years. So it was more exciting to know what's the latest release.
Yeah. But it's also like we're just used to new things, aren't we? And
but we also get, I think that also shows we get bored easily.
Yeah,
so
I think that's true.
I think even about movies, right? So, you go back, 15, 20 years, and if you had a series of movies, I think about the classic series, the Star Wars, Indiana Joneses, even, Ghostbusters, these kinds of ones, that, it was one movie every 4 years or 5 years. And, you got excited because, here it is again. And then you get the Disneyfication of, these things where actually, no, now there's not just a new Marvel there's now 4 new Marvel movies every year, plus TV shows, plus this. Star Wars, there's 6 new movies every year, plus the Star. And it's just, at one point, I know for me, I just don't care anymore. I used to be excited when there was one new Marvel movie a year because you kind of ramped up to that. And now it's, who cares? There's too much. I can't keep up, so I don't care anymore.
And then some of the stars are berating the fans if they don't go and watch it. And they're like, you're racist or sexist if you don't come watch our movie. It's like this weird... That never used to happen. I don't remember anybody getting angry if people didn't go and see their movie.
Well, and that's part of the counter argument for, part of pumping out so many that now we can do the whole, diverse cast.
Yeah,
and so, and maybe there is some of, there might be some of that, but also it's just people's lethargy about the whole industry. And so it's not because I hate female leads, it's just because you just put out your 600th Marvel movie this year and I don't have the time and capacity to care anymore.
Well, I think even with The Hobbit, they split that into 3.
Yeah, see, Lord of the Rings did 3 because it's such a mammoth.
It had 3 parts.
3 books in Lord of the Rings too. I think you went overboard with The Hobbit.
The Hobbit was just,
But even it's almost like we're getting to, Harry Potter, the last book, they split that movie into 2 as well.
Yeah. Twilight did the same thing.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of new stuff coming out. There's the 5th Toy Story coming out this year. There's the 2nd Captain America or whatever, there's the fourth this, and it's like, oh yeah, cool, whatever. But like I said, like with the Hollywood, because of social media, we're hearing the voices of stars now when we didn't used to. So it used to be a little bit exciting when we saw our favourite stars on the screen, because we didn't know much about them. But when they get on Twitter, you go, oh, okay, they're just as commonplace as the rest of us. And like I said, they start going, you should come and see my movie. And people were like having these big debates about whether you should change the race of a character or, you know, all this sort of debate. It seems like almost like the debate around it is more entertaining to people than the actual movie themselves. Like there's a podcast called Nerd Erotic and another one called The Critical Drinker, and they've got like 1 million subscribers each. And people love just watching them pay out on all these things that are coming out. And they don't have to go see the movie because they... Yeah, it's a really different world we live in.
Well, those stars speaking out make me think of kind of the almost underlying knowledge that that's a dying industry in the way that it has been since the 50s, for example, because the internet, we watch movies on Netflix now. They didn't used to do movies, but now they do movies all the time. Like they make Netflix-only movies or Apple TV-only movies.
Prime, yeah.
So they know they're under threat. That industry knows they're under threat. So now we need to push it to an nth degree. I've talked about before, that's that innovator's dilemma, is that they get to a point where you're so used to something being so profitable that you don't know how to change and redo it.
Yeah, and there's that idea that Andy Crouch talks about, which is a new technology means it makes new things possible, but also makes some old things impossible. So possibly some of the sheen's gone off the movies. So yeah, you can create all this CGI and all these new movies a lot quicker. But the sheen of going with your friends to the latest movie. I mean, I remember when they announced Back to the Future 2, I was just so stoked. I thought, oh, what, they're going to make another one? Like, that's amazing. It's like now it's like, oh, yeah, they're making another one. They'll make 16 of them.
Another sequel, yeah.
Yeah, and they get all random and don't really stay true to the original IP and all that sort of stuff.
Well, there's a lack of creativity, isn't there? It's more because that industry is on its way
that's
out.
What you were saying last week, wasn't it?
Let's make movies that are just going to make us money. But the problem is that exacerbates the problem because now there's less creativity. So eventually you've got stars now speaking out saying, come and see a movie, because then that means if you don't come and see the movie, eventually I won't end up getting paid. Like they get paid for a movie, but I need to make another movie. I need to make another movie.
All that sort of stuff, eh? So when it comes back to church, like why are people coming to church? Like where is it? What's happening in our space? And I think we had a bit of a laugh at the beginning of the podcast about that AI Catholic priest. But you know, there is a question of what is church. You know, how relational is it to go to church for an hour and maybe only go once a month and then maybe have a cup of tea with someone and then go on to the next thing? Is that, you know, talking about that slow food movement, what I find exciting about that is thinking, I don't know what that slow church book said, but the idea of spending more time together as God's people and slowing down and actually having a conversation over maybe food or something else to say, what's happening in your life? How are you going? Or what did you think of that message? But we don't even know each other enough to talk about the sermon. Sometimes we don't know everyone's name. So connecting it with the movies, like I don't think I've been to a movie for a long time, actually. Can't think of it. But I hadn't thought about that, Tim, till just then. But, you know, you go to a movie with a few friends and you don't know everyone else in the room. And has church become like that for people? Do you go with a few friends and there's all this crowd and it's not really a benefit to be in a bigger group, but you somehow feel like it's more successful? Or why do people like bigger churches when you don't really know everyone sometimes? What do you think about that?
Well, it's because it's not about knowing other people. And so I think it is a bit like the movies, that you're there for enjoyment, you're there for maybe to be taught by a great speaker. So, you know, I don't need to care about anyone else in the room in order to have an experience where I sing praises to God, where I hear a great speaker speak into my life who can, you know, explain the scriptures and help me understand the scriptures in a way that's beneficial for me and my discipleship. And so because it's an individualistic experience, then it doesn't really matter the size of the church. And in fact, if I also have more of an introverted personality, then being lost in a crowd is going to be much more achievable.
It's easier.
It's easier than to go somewhere where I'm going to be known and I'm going to be talked to, and someone who makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, right.
You know, and we talked about this when I was on with Fee a couple of weeks ago. The idea that when you go to your church seeking relationship, and we quoted your phrase, which is, we let Jesus pick our friends for us. So this idea that I'm going to be friends with whoever's here in this room, which many of them may not be the people that I would choose in a social circle to hang out with. And I know you mentioned last week the idea of the Friends TV show. You've got these 6 friends that live in New York together, and it's really hard to crack into that group, and no one else is able to do it successfully. Whereas the idea of a church where my friendship with a small group, like you talked about last week, can actually be with an outward facing, that I can use the strength of this friendship in order to be open and welcoming to others, is really significant.
Sorry, I was just thinking using the strength of that friendship, but I hadn't heard it put in that way. What I did want to ask though is, has online church affected that in a way of, do you think that people see church differently since the pandemic and when we had to do church? What do you think, Stu?
Yeah, I'm hearing more and more people saying, I watched online last week and da-da-da-da. I think most of our church, because we do have some elements like dinners and stuff, we at least are trying to encourage people to make friends with people who aren't like themselves, although that's not always what everybody opts to do. Some people do, some people don't. Others are, I think, still, if it's raining, I might watch it online. If I'm a bit tired, I might watch it online. There's a transactional component to that, which I think we need to be aware of and consider. So, I think that could increase in time, particularly as Elon Musk has said that with his Optimus robot, he reckons he'll make more money off that than he will off his Tesla cars. And even when they become self-driving, he thinks that the robots are going to make heaps more money. So I think there's something there about ease. People like an easy option for something. And if I've got someone who could mow the lawn for me and I don't have to pay them, then I think that's going to be very interesting. But how does that affect church? Well, I think the idea of an AI preacher is not something that's going to happen. However, it's interesting that people are almost looking for AI church. It's like maybe the next stage of church is I just consume the elements of it that I want and I just leave the rest. So I was talking to someone the other day who was very interesting. They said they come along to one of our gatherings and they noticed that while we preach that it's really good for all of us to be friends with each other, there are some people who are better friends than others. And they said, there are some groups I wouldn't go over and talk to because they would be polite to me and friendly, but then kind of wait for me to go so they get back to what they were talking about. Or I might go and talk to them and they might be friendly, but they'll come late to breakfast and not really be engaging in the otherness of breakfast, giving them an opportunity to be friends with a bigger group of people. They'll come late, and then after church they might just hang around with their small group of friends after church. So even in our church where we're trying to open up the scope of friendship, there are people who opt out of that, don't actually engage in it. The other thing the person said that was interesting was they find sometimes that people will be friendly to you at church like pleasant strangers. It's like, hi, how you going? How's your week? But then the real friendships happen off church. And so you need a special invitation into that group. And they often engage in social activities that they don't announce to everybody because they don't want everyone to come. They just want to have a few friends regularly meeting as a part of that. So it is a bit like the movies. Now, that's not wrong. Like, we have Bible studies, for example, for that. So we do have a church version of that. But it's interesting when it gets to the point where someone feels like they're not actually included because they're not in a clique. So they're not in one of those groups in the church. That happens spontaneously. Now, funnily enough, C.S. Lewis talked about that back in the 40s. So this is obviously not just a modern problem. And he said that cliques in churches are like onions, that even if you get in a clique, then you're constantly worried about being in the centre of that clique. So you might feel like you're an outer skin of the onion. You might be in the middle somewhere, but everyone's desperately trying to get into that centre where there's 2 or 3 people that have the real relationship that everybody's interested in. So there is this desire of relationship, but kind of almost like exclusive as well. And I don't really understand that. For years and years, I've wondered, why is that? Why do people want an exclusive group that other people can't be a part of? It's not part of my logic in my life, so I don't really understand it. But Because I've always thought, I can have a few good friends, but I can liberate them for the gospel so that we can be all reaching out to more people. So Jesus had John and James and Peter as probably his closest friends, but they were, like after Jesus went into heaven, they all spread out all over the place. So I've got a really good friend, Archie Poulos, and he said to me once that his best friend and he hang out once a year. And I said, really? Can he really be a best friend if you only see him once a year? And he said, yeah, we have lunch once a year. We talk to each other during the year and stuff, but we've both made a commitment to the kingdom that we want to liberate each other for the gospel so that we can be available for the kingdom. And I thought that was pretty cool. So that was a bit of a countercultural alternative view of church where we think, I just need that group of 5 or 6 best friends who are all the same age as me. They're all the same, possibly sometimes same economic status, like same class as me. I don't think race is as big a deal in Australia, though it may play a part for some people. But I think, it probably does for some people. But definitely class does. And also definitely social acumen. So I want to be close and in a discipleship relationship with other people that are easy to relate to socially, often have similar interests to me. So this guy who was talking about not feeling part of his particular gathering at Soul Revival was saying, I noticed that these guys are a bit wealthier than me and they have the capacity to do things with each other that I don't have the economic capacity to do. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I'm kind of as finessed in my social ability as they seem to be with each other. And so I just don't think I'm easy to fit for them, which I thought was quite profound. I don't know, sometimes I think about that and I think wouldn't it be nice if we could be close with each other but also embrace otherness as well? Because what can happen in churches is some of those cliques or groups don't actually attend some of the things that churches do to try and bring us all together because they're already friends with each other. They don't need any more friends. And in fact, my impression is that sometimes people will talk to someone at church and go, oh, you're a bit of hard work, and then make a bit of a decision that I'm not going to let that person become too close to me, because there's actually a lot of stuff in the culture these days that says, have people that are safe in your life. And again, that's a good thing, but maybe the shadow is we don't want to be too uncomfortable with someone who maybe hasn't got the same interests as me or whatever. I mean, we see it with young people. Surfers don't tend to hang out with computer nerds. It's just an observation I've made. But if a surfer knows another surfer, they'll go, oh, great, and they'll be close and they'll sit with each other in church and they'll probably have the same Bible study and they'll go surfing together or whatever. But if there's a kid comes along with a bit of a scruffy haircut and not the same kind of style and doesn't surf, I don't really have anything in common. I find it hard to know what to talk about. So we kind of don't try. We sort of pull back. And I think there's something there that people wonder why our churches aren't growing, but we kind of seem to have groups of Christians that are sort of closed to new people. And sometimes even whole churches can be closed, I think. But actually, you sat in my pew, what are you doing there? That's my seat, Or a new person can come and no one goes and talks to them. So I think the slowing down of things and at least trying to talk about it is a good thing. At least trying to model it is also a good thing. Maybe having one-on-one conversations that are gracious and kind and loving, but just helping people to think about embracing otherness. Because those church events I was talking about before, sometimes we'll have a men's event at our church where we'll do something with all the men, and the men who come is always interesting to me, and it's often the guys who don't have friends that will go to that. But the guys who do have friends, I'm a bit busy, I don't have time, but they've gone and played golf with each other on Sunday or gone surfing with each other on Saturday or something. You know what I'm trying to say? So it's almost left to the pastors to look after all the people that people don't want to look after. So discipleship, I think, in the kingdom is more costly than that. And it's about me embracing otherness and being willing for that person to actually come into my life and to have it as an all-of-life thing rather than compartmentalise, well, I'll put you into that category over there as a pleasant stranger and these people are my friends. Yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Do you think, Tim, like off the back of what Stu's saying there, do you think it's easy for things to cost us now? Like we're more comfortable. It's easier to be more comfortable. So the reason that it's easy, we just want to stay in our cliques, like you're saying, Stu, is that, it's just easy and I don't have to do that in any part of my life anymore. That maybe we might have had to back in earlier parts of the century.
Yeah, we're not used to doing hard things. We don't like doing hard things. So
I don't think anyone likes doing hard things, but they're beneficial for us.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's definitely a part of our body, our psychology, where practicing hard things and getting used to them is a good thing for us, and stretching ourselves. And I mean, it's a lot easier to sit on the couch and eat donuts than it is to go for a walk. And going for a walk is better for you. Easy doesn't mean better. And I think we've conflated those two things far too much. And again, coming back to the AI conversation, and any of these technologies, they make our lives easier. We assume, I think this is probably a product of modernity and the scientific revolution particularly, we assume that easier is better, which there is a lot of overlap between those things. I'm glad that we don't have to use a washboard anymore, and I can chuck things in the washing machine, turn it on, and forget about it for an hour and a bit. So absolutely, but yes, if we imbibe that message of easy is better too much, then yes, we get to this point where we don't have the hard conversations that we need to. We don't take the discipline of turning off the Netflix that just keeps playing episodes and actually reading a book, reading a Bible, praying. So yes, I think it's definitely that. And when it comes to relationships, as Stu's been saying, there are people that I will find it naturally easier to be friends with. And of course, my easy self, my natural self might walk into church and go, there's that group over there and there's that group over there. That group I'm going to expend a lot of energy to communicate with. I'm going to have to carry the conversation. I'm going to have to ask a lot of questions. I'm going to have to be curious about things that I just deeply don't care about.
And I'm already tired and I've only just got myself here.
That's
sort
right.
of thing, isn't it?
And then there's this group where I can just collapse. And I think bouncing off what you said last week about those concentric circles of friends.
Yeah, I did talk about that last week as well, didn't I? Yeah.
Which was really, really helpful. And I think that there are people, like I do have close friends that I know I can just completely collapse. I don't have to be as careful in language. Obviously, I still want to be holy and still be a Christian, but there are people that I can relax with in ways that I can't relax in other conversations, because I may have to carry conversations. I may have to be thinking about
the weaker brother,
what's helpful for them, and those kinds of things. So and part of that is going to be, how do I come to church? And there are going to be some weeks where I'm just tired, and I need the church to care for me as I walk in, barely having made it and just completely burnt out from a week or whatever it might be. And there are other times when it's actually on me to be the responsible one to rest well, make decisions in the day, week, hours leading up to church, where if I can walk into that building being refreshed and ready and engaged and looking out for those who are going to be harder, but maybe even more beneficial to enjoy. Yeah.
But we're not really, you could say the world doesn't really encourage us to think about that. It's do whatever suits you. And then as Christians, I can go and rest at church, but I'll just be with the friends that are easiest to me. So I'm resting, rather than even thinking the way you've said there of how do I design or make choices in my life so that I am reasonably well rested, so I can give at church and give myself do something that's more costly than doing that at church.
There's one of the famous English pastors, I can't remember if it was Spurgeon or Lloyd Jones, or he was one of those kind of big personalities from English church history, who would be really conscious about his diet. Like, he had thought about his diet so much that he made sure that he ate the right foods in the day before and the hours leading up to the Sunday service, so that he could be his best self when he was there.
That's cool.
And I just think there's a huge intentionality there to say, I'm here for the sake of serving my flock from the point of view of a minister, but even those who are just just attending. Like, I think part of what we talked about the last few weeks is not just attending. You're there to feed into other people. You are here for this idea of corporate discipleship, that I'm growing by being in proximity with others and they're growing by being in proximity with me, that I can't get online. I can't grow as a Christian if it is a consumption of a TV show style thing that I'm just watching on my computer, which again, yes, there are hard cases where there are people who can't access physical collection of God's people together. So I'm not talking about hard cases, but for most of us in suburbia, that's not our situation. If we don't go to church in suburbia, there are other things going on, and I think that's kind of where we're trying to push and find how do you have those conversations.
So you wanted to pick up something you also said last week, and the intentionality thing was really interesting that you were saying there, Tim. But I was going to pick on something you said last week about discipleship and mission being almost taken out of the church or removed from a church context. Do you think that plays into what we're talking about today as well?
Yeah, I want to be really careful how I say this, because we are doing mission and discipleship in our churches. So the sermon is discipleship, and we're definitely learning and reading, gathering around God's word. We're praying together, we're singing together. All those things are growing us and discipling us at a certain level. But the actual one-on-one relational aspect that we can have with each other, or group aspect of discipleship in church, is reduced down sometimes to listening and consuming, maybe contributing in some gatherings through the liturgy or through the singing. However, the actual informal aspect of discipleship is limited. So we have a formal discipleship, but the informal discipleship that we have one-on-one with God's people, where we, engage with each other and, rub off the rough corners of our, as we partner with the Holy Spirit as He is sanctifying us to be more like Jesus, we're actually partnering with each other to help each other to grow and building one another up. So in Ephesians 4, when Paul talks about the body of Christ being all these different parts that are all designed for the church to be built up, and everyone has a gift to be able to use their gift in the church, I think yes, there's a roster, there are some formal aspects to it, but there's more and more a lot of consuming of church as we've made it more professional and more industrialised. We're sort of paying for our pastors and abdicating our responsibility for our young kids and our youth, for them to look after them a bit sometimes. Our services are separated, so sometimes people don't even know people of different generations, and if they do, it's a bit awkward. Oh, hi, yeah, you're a Christian too. Wow, that's crazy. You're old or you're young. I don't really understand you. I don't like your music. And we talk about the differences. And then when it comes to the end of the services, where we might have 15 minutes over a cup of tea, I don't want to diminish that, but sometimes it's more like, I'll have a cup of tea with everyone and then I'll go off to my next thing. And I've had conversations with people that could be discipleship conversations that are sometimes cut short by, I've got to go, or the kids are getting rowdy, or so that then we sort of think about it as church leaders, and we say, well, let's provide people with discipleship opportunities as well as church. So, everyone's busy. We've got an hour a week, maybe a cup of tea. So why don't we start a Bible study, and we'll get people into a Bible study, or we'll do a missional course during the week. So we're kind of exporting our discipleship and mission to those other times. Yep. So we don't have time for discipleship and mission at church. So we do, like I said, I don't want to sound like I'm saying we don't do discipleship and mission at church. We do, but let's also do these other moments. And so I think what can be a function of that is that people will be pleasant with each other at church and have polite conversations, and then wait for Bible study during the week to have the discipleship conversation with a smaller group of people from that gathering. And that's not bad. It's a good thing, but we've kind of exported discipleship like that off the service. And then when it comes to mission, we do ask people to church, but increasingly I've heard a lot of missional thinkers saying people don't come to church anymore. So, and church is so foreign culturally to them that it's better to do incarnational ministry, which is a broad catchphrase talking about go and be with people where they're at, which is a good thing. Do mission in your local schools and in your where you go to the Sharks on the weekend or wherever it might be, or over dinner parties. But in a way, that's also exporting mission out of the church service as well. So again, I'm not saying there's no mission and discipleship in the church, but we've exported some of our really deepest moments in discipleship and mission outside of church, and then we wonder why people aren't coming to church, because maybe people are like, well, I'm doing discipleship at my Bible study and I'm doing my mission with my friends over dinner, and in fact, they're going away for the weekend, so for mission, I'll go away on the weekend with them to build that relational ministry, because a lot of people are into friendship evangelism, which is people take a long time to earn the right to be heard before they share the gospel. They want to build a strong relationship. So they're going skiing on the weekend. If I'm rich and I'm going skiing with them on the weekend, I might miss church. And then it's like, oh, they're going on a sailing boat, or even if they're going to the Sharks and there's a football game on at the same time, or whatever it might, or they're at the pub instead, or people are like making decisions not to go to church for mission and maybe for discipleship too. So I think it would be really exciting if we had a conversation about what is the scope for discipleship and mission at church, and how can we do more mission and discipleship at church. And so for us, it's been, let's start a meal so we spend more time with each other, and that does give us more framework for mission and discipleship, because if someone's not quite ready to come along to a church service yet, but they can come and have a meal with us, then we could do that together. And so that's a group discipleship and group missional expression that's quite easy to connect to a service. It's also something busy Christians can opt in of to or opt out of. But yeah, I sometimes hear people say, oh, the latest thing to do at church is do a meal. Well, actually, what's the heart behind the meal? Like, what's the discipleship and the missional heart behind it? So before you just start a meal for the sake of it, it's important to think, how can this be a discipleship reality? How can the leaders actually open their lives to be friends with the people that they're doing this with? Because if that doesn't happen, and it's just another token experience, you're just going to be extending the coffee time and polite conversation. And we struggle with that at our church. We still have people who sit by themselves at dinner. And, I think that's an emergency when I see that at church. But a lot of Christians don't see it as an emergency. So,
I just heard you say, with the willingness to open our lives, that is almost in contrast to that individualistic, I just go and get it for myself. Why don't you both see if you can answer, how do we encourage people to open their lives more? Because we just did a Chip Lunch podcast talking about Week Away and how we loved going on Week Away, and we actually each morning we got people up the front, and we were really blown away by how encouraging it was when a number of couples came up and shared something that had been very difficult for them recently, and they were really vulnerable, and that was something that we loved about it. And I was saying, you only really, a lot of the time you don't get a deeper relationship connection with someone unless one person is vulnerable and you don't smash them for it. You know what I mean? That you don't dismiss what they're being vulnerable for. How do we encourage more of that to happen when the world is telling us just put on your Apple Pro Vision goggles and focus on yourself and don't worry about being vulnerable with someone else, for example?
I think that might be a good segue, Joel, into next week even, actually, because one of the things that I think happens in the Christian church is that when you serve Jesus together, then that builds intimacy. So what I think we do in our culture is we want to build intimacy before we serve. And so we build intimacy around common activities, and then we see if we've got enough energy left after we've done all that to actually serve together in church. There is rightly a number of people who feel like they've been burnt out or used in churches because they're just events and they've just been pumping out these events week after week. But if there is a relational gathering of God's people where people are encouraged to input their giftedness into that, it's a spiritual reality. It's not just a thing that you do. And so I think actually forming ministry teams that minister together within that breakfast, for example, or lunch or dinner, also gathering together people who pray and gathering them together for the ministry and for relationship. I don't think we think like that. I think we think, let's get a bunch of youth leaders. If they happen to be friends, great, but actually the activity is to get a youth group going. And if the event's running, great, we're happy with that. Oh, someone's burnt out and they've left, let's get another person in. But if we think a bit more holistically and we think, let's get ministry teams together who serve Jesus side by side, gather around God's word, pray for each other, and are actually serving Jesus together, that will build intimacy. So that's an interesting possible spin-off from today that we could come back to.
What do you think you want to add to that, Tim, before we wrap up the podcast?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's the attitude we come to church with and what we think church is, and I think for a lot of people we think that church is an event, and so therefore if I contribute to this event, then I'm part of the production team that's pulling this off, and so therefore I feel like a worker in this event, like I'm part of the volunteer service team that is pulling off this event. And I think one of the things that we've tried in different ways to express at Soul Revival Church is the idea that it's not an event, we are family, we're friends together, and we happen to do these things together as friends. And so when I am making banana bread for Sunday mornings, I'm not part of the production team of an event that's pulling off Sunday morning. I'm making a loaf of banana bread because I love my friends, and this is a way that I can serve my friends, and we get to eat together. And how cool is it that we can eat together? When I am, we have a roster to organise the number of people who might be on cleanup any given week. But if I come thinking, today I'm on the roster and I'm doing this because I need to do the event, that's one particular mindset. If it's like, that's right, this week I'm the one who gets to clean up after my friends because many other weeks I get cleaned up after, and isn't it great hanging out with friends and doing this together? And as Stu said, doing it as friends in the service team. So you build those service teams together so that this group of 5 or 6 people, they're always on cleanup together. So whenever they're on, they can just continue to express the friendship that they have every single week. And this week, they're expressing their friendship through cleaning up and being in the kitchen and washing dishes and drying up. And the other week, they might express their friendship by splitting up and going and hanging out with new people. Or there's lots of different ways to express it. So what do we think we're coming to? And I think too many of us as Christians think that we're coming to an event, and that shapes it in a way that it's an obligation, it's not a opportunity. And I think that that's really key and something we can probably explore later as well.
That's good.
Yeah, I think serving together is a really great way to build relationship with each other. I think about when I first started youth leading, it was with Jared and Pete, who we didn't really know very well, Michael and myself. But over those years of serving together for almost, it would have been 5.5 years, something like that, they're really good mates now because we did it together. And that spiritual reality is something you brought up, Stu. I'd like to explore that more at another point. But that's something that maybe I haven't considered enough as much, that maybe because we think it's an event we don't understand or grasp that it's that spiritual reality that we're working together for Jesus, I think. Or not working, even serving together, I should say, for Jesus. Yeah. Anyway. Great way to finish. Thank you. Thank you for a great podcast.
Thank you, John.
All that talk of banana bread's made me hungry for lunch, so should we go do that? And if anyone wants to comment on or chat about what we've talked about today or any other episode, you can email me, joel@shockabsorber.com.au. Thank you for listening, if you have been, or if you've been watching, thank you as well. And thank you again for Tim and Stu's time and thoughts and wisdom. I appreciate it very much. And we'll finish with a one way.
One way.
One way.